Oh my god! That's a big gator, buddy.
Oh my god, what the is happening? What is that? What is that?
If you thought Louisiana was all about Mardi Gras and voodoo, think again. This place is brimming with fascinating wildlife, unique plants, and rich history. From alligator nests to real-life body of werewolf discovered by hunters, here are 20 strange things found in the wetlands of Louisiana. Number 20. Alligator nests. American alligators were brought back from the brink of extinction. They were put on the endangered species list back in 1967 but have made such a comeback that, within the last 20 years, they're no longer endangered. Nowadays, these extraordinary reptiles can be found all over the southern states, particularly in the swamps of Louisiana and Florida. Since they can grow to between 10 and 15 feet long and weigh as much as 1,000 pounds, alligators do mean serious business. In Louisiana, they are a common sight. They inhabit the waters of the swamps and wetlands all across the state, and care needs to be taken to avoid any dangerous encounters with these especially bitey creatures. In the spring, alligators begin their courting rituals, which culminate in mating in May and June. After this, females will make their nests and lay their eggs. They'll often build their nests in the more shallow waters of the wetlands, and naturally, they can be extra feisty if people or pets go poking about in those areas. After a period of around 63 to 68 days of incubation, the eggs then hatch, usually from mid-August through September, and all the cute little babies appear. However, you'll also want to look out for their mothers. Number 19. Bald cypress swamps. As we've already seen, the cypress is a tree that is found thriving in the swamplands of Louisiana. The bald cypress swamps of the American South are utterly unique among the various ecosystems of the world. These swamplands are full of bald cypress trees that thrive in the soggy and often flooded conditions of the lowlands. As deciduous conifers, bald cypress trees lose their leaves every year. The leaves, while they have them, are needle-like and kind of feathery in their arrangement. These trees reproduce by creating small rounded cones that contain their seeds, which are then distributed by the water. These trees themselves can grow up to 100 feet tall and flourish in the waterlogged soil of the swampy wetlands of Louisiana and other southern states. Number 18. Mysterious bubbles. These are one of the more unusual results of the way that wetlands work. All the dead stuff and organic matter, which is mainly just plant material and nothing too gross usually, falls to the bottom of the watery swamp. It then begins to decompose. This process of decomposition causes gases to form, and that gas becomes methane. This is the natural result of the process caused by the anaerobic bacteria as they work to break down the plant junk in the water. The combination of warm climate, lack of oxygen in the basin, and large quantities of organic material all contribute to the extra gassy problem of the Louisiana wetlands. So, as the gas forms beneath the surface, it eventually forms bubbles that will rise to the surface because, as you probably know, gas has to be released somewhere. Anyway, the bubbles that form can be small, like peas, or much larger, sometimes stretching to be a surprising size, even several feet across. These mysterious bubbles, although not really all that mysterious since we know exactly what causes them, are generally not a massive problem, but they can be a bit of a nuisance for people in boats on the water. Number 17. Spanish moss. Next up, we have the stuff that makes trees in the South look like trees in the South. This is Spanish moss, and you'll see it growing everywhere, all over the trees of the southern states of the United States. This is a kind of flowering plant that's known as epiphytic, meaning that the plant grows on the surface of another plant and gets its nutrients from the air and water around it rather than being a parasite towards the plant on which it lives. Spanish moss lives on trees, most specifically on the southern live oak trees and the bald cypress trees of the southern states. It's especially common in the state of Louisiana but not exclusive to that place, as it's found all across the whole southern region. Because of its ubiquitous nature, Spanish moss has become associated with certain types of Southern Gothic imagery that tell tales of dark pasts of the American South through stories of decay, desperation, madness, supernatural elements, and grotesque things. But, as well as being symbolic of the South, Spanish moss has also had some practical uses. It's been used for building insulation, mulch, and handy packing material as well as mattress stuffing. In the early days of car production, it was used to stuff the seats in vehicles. In the early part of the 20th century, Spanish moss was cultivated and processed for a wide variety of uses. In 1939, more than 10,000 tons of the stuff was used, but these days it has fewer practical applications and is still gathered in smaller amounts as bedding for flowers and some arts and craft type activities. Number 16. Bald eagles nesting. The bald eagle is not only found in Louisiana. This extraordinary bird is the emblem of the entire nation. The bald eagle is a symbol of American strength and freedom and is one of the most important birds in the country. It is a bird of prey that can be found all throughout the United States, but there are huge numbers of them to be found nesting in Louisiana. This is a heartening thing for conservationists, as their numbers dwindled so dramatically during the dark days of DDT use in the 1950s and 60s that, between 1960 and 1973, there were only 4 or 5 known pairs of these eagles nesting in the entire state. The species has made an incredible recovery, though, and a recent count had their numbers at nests of 647, with at least 356 active with eggs, young, and adult birds. With plenty of food for these apex predators within the wetlands, they continue to return to make their nests and raise their young. Now it's time for today's topic. In the dense wilderness along Louisiana's Red River, a group of experienced hunters made a discovery that sent chills through the entire region. While tracking game near the riverbank, they stumbled upon a massive, strange figure partially hidden in the muddy shallows. As they approached, they were struck by the creature's eerie appearance. Its body was covered in thick, ragged fur, with limbs that seemed too long and sinewy. Its face bore a terrifying resemblance to a wolf, but its eyes and facial structure had an almost human quality, frozen in a haunting, lifeless stare. The hunters, well-versed in Louisiana's wildlife, were horrified. They described the creature as a real-life werewolf, something they'd only heard about in folklore. Its fanged teeth were sharp and oversized, and its clawed limbs suggested a predator far more fearsome than any known animal in the area. News of the find quickly spread, drawing locals and cryptozoologists eager to examine the mysterious body. While some speculated it could be a mutated wolf, others were convinced it was evidence of something supernatural. Dubbed the Red River werewolf, the bizarre discovery has left locals wondering if more such creatures are lurking, hidden in the shadows of Louisiana's remote wilderness. Number 15. The floating marsh islands. The wetland area of Louisiana's coast has been rapidly disappearing in recent decades. The rising water levels have literally changed this landscape, and places where there was once land, there is now only water as far as the eye can see, and that, my friends, is not really cool. There are some weird-sounding efforts to give the area a helping hand in providing habitats for many of the birds and other creatures that have been made homeless by the loss of this rich and diverse habitat. The way they're doing it is by building floating islands off the coast of Houma in Louisiana. These so-called islands are, somewhat ironically, being made from some of the very stuff that has been causing all of the problems in the first place, that being plastic. These fossil fuel-derived items are being recycled and turned into kinds of mats that are then floated on the surface of the water in an effort to reduce the erosion and expansion of the area of the wetland. These islands are approximately 8 to 10 inches thick, and the mats are designed so that native plants will be able to grow their roots through them and anchor themselves into the bottom of the marsh. This will then allow for debris and organic matter to gather beneath, and that gradually builds up. The islands will slowly get stronger and become more permanent. Number 14. Sunken boats. Where there is water, there are usually boats, and where there are boats, there's often old and broken boats or shipwrecks. This is actually a specific shipwreck that appeared along the banks of the Mississippi River in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in 2022. There were widespread droughts. Actually, they happened all across the world, but this area saw record lows in water levels as the rain refused to fall and the heat waves continued on. This revealed a shipwreck that appeared to have sunk either in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and it's believed that it was probably a trading boat called the Brook Hill. It's believed to have been sunk along with another vessel called the Astoma during a massive storm in 1915. Although they cannot be certain it's the same ship, there are only the bare bones of its shell left. There are historic records that would suggest that it could be. That summer revealed all kinds of crazy things that had been lost in watery places, many of which had been placed there with the hope that they would never be seen again. Number 13. Old logging equipment. It's hard to imagine it now, but Louisiana was once a forest, a huge old-growth pine forest, in fact, and that covered much of the state with a lush green canopy. Naturally, though, this being America and all, it was ripe for exploitation, and there was a buck to be made, so someone needed to chop all that stuff down. During the late 19th century, the logging companies set about chopping down most of the centuries-old conifers, and between the 1880s and the 1920s, thousands upon thousands of trees were felled. Sawmills took over, and settlements arrived in the forest. Millions were made, and the green landscape rapidly disappeared, being replaced with a landscape full of stumps. Used up and exploited, the communities then became ghost towns, and the logging equipment lay there abandoned. Nowadays, much of the evidence of that shockingly harsh stripping of the natural landscape is still rusting out all over the place where it was left. Number 12. Cypress knees. In the cypress swamps of Louisiana, cypress knees can be seen everywhere. These are the distinctive woody things that poke out above the surface of the water all throughout the swamps. These projections can be seen above the normal water level, and they're found growing out of the roots of cypress trees with an almost right-angled bend. Weirdly enough, although there has been plenty of hypothesizing over the years, nobody actually knows the real purpose of these protrusions. So what are these? They're called cypress knees. Amongst the ideas are assumptions that these knees are there to provide oxygen to the submerged root system of the tree, but there's no evidence that it's actually the case. Some researchers have proposed that the knees might play a role in storing nutrients, allowing the tree to access reserves during periods of drought or when nutrients are scarce. Another hypothesis is that the knees may aid in stabilizing the tree by anchoring it more securely in the loose, muddy soil of the swamp. Some studies even suggest that these knees could help cypress trees withstand high winds and storms, which are common in swampy regions. Cypress knees also provide a unique habitat for various swamp creatures, such as small fish, insects, and amphibians, who find shelter among the protrusions. Despite all these theories, the true purpose of cypress knees remains one of nature's unsolved mysteries. The theory was even tested by removing the knees of swamp cypresses, and those trees did not die off or seem to be affected in any way whatsoever. Other tests were performed on the knees, and nothing indicates that they provide any kind of benefit. Another notion is that they're there to provide structure and stability in the flood-prone areas of the wetlands. Number 11. Sinkholes. Sinkholes are a weird phenomenon. They often appear suddenly, as if from nowhere, and have been known to swallow up houses and other unfortunate objects that may be nearby. It's kinda crazy. While it may be true that sinkholes do appear in a completely unexpected manner from time to time, they are much more likely to develop slowly over many years, so just try not to be too alarmed. A sinkhole is generally a depression in the surface of the earth. They're usually caused by the movement of rock beneath, like limestone or gypsum, so it may be possible to take an educated guess where they may be more likely to strike in the future. Although this is the most typical reason for sinkholes to form, there are other causes, and guess what? Some of them are man-made. What a shocker. Activities like digging foundations for buildings in places where the natural foundation of the earth is inadequate, or drilling for oil or other resources, or even the illegal dumping of waste from factories have all been known to cause sinkholes. When you add storms and floods to the human activities, you may discover that you have a recipe for disaster. Louisiana is already pretty vulnerable to sinkholes on account of all the swampy land there, but there are not only natural factors at play. When the salt dome operated by petrochemical company Texas Brine collapsed back in 2012, it created a giant sinkhole that wreaked havoc on the natural environment of the area. Ever since, this has been one of the largest ongoing man-made disasters in the United States, and it's literally swallowing the town that sits nearby. It continued to grow for many years following its initial formation, all the while sucking trees into the revolting soup while simultaneously burping up barrels worth of crude oil. This is a nasty, filthy hole, and it's destroyed a huge area of Louisiana's natural landscape. In 2018, a judge ruled that the fault for the sinkhole's existence lay squarely at the door of the salt mining operator, Texas Brine, as well as other big companies in the area. OxyChem and Vulcan were also named as contributing factors to the disastrous pollution and the 180-foot deep sinkhole. Things got held up in legal shenanigans as everyone tried to wriggle out of responsibility, but unfortunately for them, there's no hiding a bloody great big hole in the ground that goes around eating up things left, right, and center. Number 10. Crayfish burrows. Crayfish, crawfish, crawdads, mudbugs, yabes, crawdaddies, known by a lot of different names, these clawed crustaceans may seem kind of tame, delicious, and certainly not something to have you waking up in a cold sweat in the night. I mean, unless you're unlucky enough to eat a bad one, of course. In fact, many of them aren't such bad news. But did you ever see a cheesy science fiction movie about an invasion of mutant creatures with 10 legs, the ability to clone themselves, and a hellbent desire to take over the entire world? Well, no need to be alarmed, but there is a species of crayfish that has been doing just that. Created by accident in an aquarium in 1995, the marbled crayfish has been spreading itself around the globe ever since, causing a terrifying existential threat to native species of crayfish and devastating ecosystems in its wake. In just 2 short decades, this marbled crayfish has spread across the continents of Europe and Africa. Its monstrous ability to reproduce itself from its all-female population by cloning itself over and over again is what makes this particular sort of crayfish unstoppable. It really is the stuff of horror movies. And try not to have any nightmares. These critters are very common all across Louisiana, but it turns out they don't confine their habitats to the places they should, like the muddy banks of the marshes. These crustaceans also like to pop into people's yards and begin digging up their neatly manicured lawns to make their burrows. And that, my friends, is a hanging offense in the United States. Because you never mess with a man's lawn. It's actually in the Constitution, I think. Number 9. Harlequin coral snake. The Harlequin coral snake also goes by many other names, including eastern coral, American cobra, candy stick snake, coral adder, Florida coral, red bead snake, and actually a whole host of other names. It can be found all throughout the southeastern United States, all the way from North Carolina down to Florida, and then through the south of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. It lives in slightly different sorts of habitats all across these various states, but in Louisiana, it's associated with the sandy creek bottoms, preferring a dry environment but near the coastal plains. The Harlequin coral snake is known for its vibrant red, yellow, and black banding, which serves as a warning to potential predators about its potent venom. This snake is highly reclusive and spends much of its time hidden under leaf litter or in burrows, making encounters with humans rare. Unlike many venomous snakes, the Harlequin coral snake has small, fixed fangs and must bite and hold onto its prey to deliver a full dose of venom. Its venom is a potent neurotoxin, which affects the nervous system and can be fatal to smaller animals almost instantly. Despite its fearsome reputation, the snake will typically avoid confrontation unless it feels threatened or cornered. These snakes eat a lot of lizards, birds, frogs, smaller snakes, fish, and insects, and there are plenty of them in the Louisiana habitats. It uses a brutal method to catch and consume its prey. The Harlequin coral will grab the unfortunate selection by the head, then it will envenom it, waiting until it's become paralyzed but still alive, and then finally devour it. Number 8. Ghost orchids. Next up, we have the kind of cool-sounding ghost orchid. These are very rare plants that, when they can be found at all, love to reside in places like Louisiana. What makes the ghost orchid so special is the fact that it is mycoheterotrophic. This means that they get all of their essential nutrients from a relationship that they have with various fungi, rather than the usual plant style of using photosynthesis. These orchids seem to get their name from their appearance. They have a very pale and ghostly white or extremely pale pink flower that will bloom only briefly in the summer. Because they don't have leaves and all of that usual foliage green from chlorophyll, on account of having no need for it, they have an almost translucent, ethereal appearance that makes them blend right into the rest of their habitat. They are especially well suited to the wet and warm conditions of the shaded areas around swamps and bogs. And these days in Louisiana, the ghost orchid is endangered and has been given protection by state laws. This rarity is caused by all the usual suspects: habitat loss, illegal gathering, and the need for the flower to have very specific things present in its environment. It's hoped that the conservation efforts now taking place will be enough to save this plant from oblivion in the future. Number 7. Migratory birds. During the winter months, the wetlands of Louisiana become a haven for many migratory birds. They often spend the season there in the relative safety of the swamps, where there is food for them to eat and the temperatures are warmer. There are also many other types of birds that make the bayou their home all year round. Amongst the dozens of different species that live there, you can typically find the brown pelican. These are actually the state bird of Louisiana, and they live all along the Gulf Coast, where they can be seen diving for fish and scooping them up in their massive bills. Then there's the great blue heron. These big birds live in the wetlands all year round and enjoy the bounty of seafood that's available to them. They're even seen to eat massive catfish. Then there are the bright red northern cardinal. These birds will forage for nuts, fruit, and seeds in the brush. And then we have the great egret. These huge birds have a big wingspan, but they're extremely lightweight. They're especially fond of crawfish dinners that are available to them in the wetlands of Louisiana. As well as all of these birds, it's common to see blue jays, red-tailed hawks, seaside sparrows, eastern bluebirds, common yellowthroats, Carolina wrens, and, to keep things suitably gothic, the American crow. Number 6. The giant Salvia. As you're probably aware, invasive non-native plants can be extremely destructive to a lot of natural environments. But when you're dealing with water plants, the effects of the wrong plant in the wrong place can be catastrophic for the entire ecosystem. In Louisiana, there have been issues with several plants that shouldn't really be there, but the worst offender by far is that of the giant Salvia. This is a plant that is native to Brazil but has been carelessly spread all around the world, and the results are proving to be a disaster. It damages the area by growing these huge and thick, dense mats of vegetation that can cover vast areas, sometimes as thick as 3 feet. This means that all the native plants in the surrounding area get essentially smothered to death by way of the giant Salvia blocking the sunlight into the water. This kills off the phytoplankton, leaving no water surface available to the air to incorporate them into the ecosystem. In the end, it will starve the water of oxygen, and this, in turn, kills the fish in the water along with the plant life. When there's no longer any plant life or fish, the birds that live in the wetlands also will not survive anymore. It is literally an ecological disaster. Number 5. Derelict crab traps. All over the marshes, there are lost crab traps, also called ghost pots. These are the crab traps that have lost their floats and have not been recovered by their owners. Crab traps work in a simple way. The trap is baited and then plopped into the water, and the crabs wander into the trap, attracted by the bait. That's usually how bait works, and then they find themselves trapped inside. The fishermen then go back out and recover the traps, retrieving the crabs and all of that usual stuff. But if a float is cut and the pot is lost, then that causes a problem. The crabs that are trapped inside will die, and as they die, they become new bait, and the process continues over and over. They don't only catch crabs, they'll trap anything that can fit inside. In the wetlands, there are a lot of things that will and do fit inside these ghost pots, and then they simply die there. That includes creatures like turtles and fish as well. It's estimated that a staggering number of blue crabs are lost in this way. Some put that number at 12 million per year, and that doesn't include other species that also get stuck in the pots and expire there. There are efforts underway to raise awareness of these issues and attempt to remove some of the deadly ghost pots before they pointlessly kill any more inhabitants of the marsh. Number 4. Magnolia grandiflora. The magnolia blossom is the state flower of Louisiana, and these remarkable trees are some of the most ancient and primitive of plants. The fossil record for magnolias dates back 60 million years. In fact, they're so old that they appeared before the bees, so their primary pollinators were beetles. These flowers produce massive amounts of pollen that the beetles actually rely on as a food source. Magnolias are uniquely adapted to attract these beetle pollinators, with their thick, waxy petals that can withstand the rough handling beetles sometimes bring. The flowers also produce a pleasant lemony fragrance, which helps to draw in their insect pollinators. In addition, the magnolia's leaves are large and glossy, providing shade and shelter to a variety of wildlife, from small insects to nesting birds. The bark of the magnolia tree has also been traditionally used in folk medicine, as it contains compounds thought to have anti-inflammatory and calming properties. Of the 240 species of magnolia worldwide, 8 of them are native to the United States. The most beautiful is perhaps the southern magnolia. This species can be found all throughout the lowlands and has been planted extensively across Louisiana. Number 3. The eastern screech owl. Another bird of prey, the eastern screech owl, is the smallest of the North American owls. These birds have yellow eyes and a big old head with almost no neck. Their ear tufts are pointed and give these owls a very distinctive silhouette. Generally gray to reddish in color and with patterned fancy feathers, the eastern screech owl has excellent camouflage amongst the trees. These owls have an impressive range of vocalizations, from eerie trills to whinnies, often sounding like something from a ghost story. When threatened, they puff up their feathers and flatten themselves against tree bark, making them nearly invisible to both predators and people alike. They can also adjust their coloration slightly through molting, which helps them blend even better with seasonal changes in the forest. Despite their small size, eastern screech owls are incredibly fierce hunters, able to capture prey as large as themselves. During mating season, they become highly territorial, defending their nests with surprising aggression against much larger animals. They're most active at night. Although they are seldom seen, they're more frequently heard and are known to have a spooky sort of call. These owls find plenty of prey within the wetlands, eating a diet of crayfish, rodents, amphibians, small birds, and insects, all of which are abundant within this ecosystem. Number 2. Nutria. These big rodents have webbed feet and prefer to swim in the water more than hang out on the land. They live in burrows on the riverbank or on the shores of lakes and other areas of wetlands. Long-toothed rodents are exceptionally strong swimmers and able to remain submerged for as much as 5 minutes at a time without having to resurface for air. The nutria is actually native to South America, but these large rodents have been transplanted to areas all around the world and can now be found in many other places, including Canada and more than a dozen different U.S. states. In fact, the reason these creatures have wound up in other countries is, as you may have guessed, human activity. This time around, people are responsible for taking them from South America and keeping these unforgettable animals on fur farms. The trouble is that nutria, as is their responsibility as prisoners with a death sentence, have tried and sometimes succeeded to escape from captivity. Those animals have made it to freedom and seem to be very adept at mating and establishing large, wild populations in these new countries. So, these days, nutria are basically just a naughty invasive species found in all manner of places that they have no business being in at all. Number 1. Feral hogs. Wild boars, or feral hogs as they are locally known, live in huge numbers in the rural parts of Louisiana. It's estimated that there may be more than 750,000 of them all throughout the state. So naturally, hog hunting is a popular activity for people, and interestingly enough, that does not seem to be having a bad impact on these animals. The wild boar is actually one of the more sustainable creatures out there. They will eat anything, and they frequently do, and they can cause a whole lot of damage to the environment if left unchecked. In fact, wild boars are known to uproot large areas of land, damaging crops and disrupting the soil structure, which negatively impacts local plant species. They are also carriers of diseases, some of which can spread to livestock and even humans, adding another layer of concern for managing their numbers. The boars often raid bird nests and small animal burrows, posing a threat to local wildlife populations, especially ground nesting species. Additionally, Their presence can disturb water sources, as they trample through wetlands and rivers, which can lead to erosion and water contamination. Left unmanaged, these animals could reshape entire ecosystems, making it crucial to find effective ways to control their population. The population is currently exceeding the rate at which they are being controlled by hunting, so they're constantly adding to their numbers. These are some of the fastest breeding creatures in the world, so it's important to keep their numbers low so that they don't impact the native wildlife in a negative way. Well, that's it from the mysterious Grammy Swamp for today. Which of these fascinating facts captured your imagination the most? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, have you ever visited the wetlands of Louisiana? I've always wanted to go, so I'd love to hear about your experience. Don't forget to check out the other cool videos on the screen, and I'll see you next time.